Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Charlotte Jameson. I'm the Program Director for Legislative Affairs, Energy and Drinking Water for the Michigan Environmental Council. Conan Smith, our President and CEO, had a conflict today, so he's unable to join us. So I'm going to be the Cruise Director for today's webinar. I hope that's okay with everybody. I'm really excited, though, because we're joined today by Senator Kurt Vanderwall and Jim Ananek. Senator Vanderwall is a Republican from Ludington who chairs the Senate Health Policy and Human Services Committee. And Senator Ananek is Democrat from Flint and is the Senate Minority Leader. So thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about lead in drinking water in schools and some bills that y'all have to prevent and reduce exposure in those venues. This is called the Filter First approach, which is being advocated by a coalition of public health, school officials, and environmental groups across the state. And the bills would ensure that school and child care centers install filtered faucets and filtered drinking fountains that would keep lead out of drinking water for staff and children alike at those facilities. Before we get started, I did just want to let folks know that if you have questions, please use the Q&A tool, and we will do our best to try to get answers to all of those questions. And if we don't make it to it today, we'll definitely try to answer them in a follow-up email as well. So first off, I just wanted, before we get into the specifics of the bills, I wondered if you guys could talk a little bit about what the threats are from lead poisoning, in particular to children. Why is this such a concerning issue to you guys?
Senator Ananek, I'm going to, since you're my senior partner, I'm going to allow you to speak first, if that's okay, and then I can follow up.
Sure. Well, and first I want to say, as Senator Vanderwall did a minute ago, thank Charlotte and the entire MEC, Michigan Environmental Council, for even doing this and for working with us on these bills, and to thank my partner in this, Chairman Vanderwall. I think, 10 days to 11 days out from an election, if you're watching the news, you'd think that Kurt and I would be at each other with pitchforks, but that's just not the case at all. Especially in Lansing, we actually find a lot more things I think that we agree on and work together on than the things that we don't. And I think water and our children are just one example. And I appreciate your partnership on this, Mr. Chairman, and our friendship. And I think this is really something that can be really important. And, having obviously living and raising a family in Flint, I know firsthand what the dangers can be and the harms can be with lead. But yeah, obviously the international attention that happened in Flint is around lead does not by any means mean that we're the only community that has to deal with this. This is an issue for all across the country and all across Michigan. And when it comes to the harms of lead, I'm sorry, it was a long way to get there, but I just wanted to make sure I did my protocol and thanked all the folks that are helping us with this. It can lead to, cognitive function issues. It can lead to, especially in younger folks. Right? I mean, it's not good for anybody, but it's definitely in your developmental years. Lead can have a lot of really harmful and long-term effects. And the best way to deal with exposure to lead is to not have it happen in the first place, right? So primary prevention is to stop it from happening before, as opposed to try to remediate the problem. So this is what our bill package would do. We would try to make the assumption that there's going to be problems, so let's get ahead of it and fix the problem ahead of time. So it's a really important question. And as was mentioned, cognitive damage, violent outbursts, violent tension, violent issues, so many things that memory and IQ loss. So it's definitely a serious issue. We've made a lot of improvements over the years, but we still have work to do. And I think this bill package would go a long way to helping our most vulnerable populations.
Great. And then Senator Vanderwall, I know you're part of the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus, and I've been in leadership role in that. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about some of that work and why lead in drinking water in schools in particular has risen to the top for a lot of Great Lakes legislators in that venue.
Absolutely. And again, I appreciate the opportunity, and it's a privilege to be on, but serving on the Great Lakes Water Caucus in Lake Michigan, we touch any province or state that touches any of the Great Lakes that are involved. And one of our number one goals has been, making sure that people understand that lead in water is a serious issue. And the number one goal is to make sure, and that's where I appreciate Senator Ananek and being willing to work with me on this, that being a senior member as he is, he has some of those connections I don't have. But water is important, and it needs to be clean, and our children need to be the number one protection that we go. And the easiest place to do that is where they attend school, where they're taken care of during the day when their parents are there, and making sure that we can filter the lead out of the water, and not necessarily always just water, but that's what we're working on currently. But we both Senator Ananek and I have some pretty old districts that we represent, and we have a lead paint issue too, which is another area that we want to continue. But it does get in the water, and we know that our kids need to be safe, the teachers need to be safe, along with their parents. So excited to be involved with it, and I think we have a great set of bills and a great opportunity.
Yeah, and I think Senator Ananek, to your point earlier, like it's easy these days to be jaded about what's possible in politics, but I think it's refreshing that we can find common ground on water issues in Michigan, which good for us. And also that like protecting children continues to be the number one priority for a lot of legislators in Lansing, which makes a lot of sense. Why don't we talk a little bit about what does the package do? What is the kind of ins and outs of the filter first approach?
Yeah, so I think when we started looking at this and then started conversations with Kurt and others, there's a number of ways to look at this. But when it comes to water, especially as Kurt mentioned with the most vulnerable, the youngest populations, we want to first, the rationale I would say would be, we want to make sure that parents, when they send their kids off to school or to a daycare, every parent or grandparent or even uncles and aunts have these fears once you have a little one that something's going to happen, right? And you can't stop all those fears from happening. But one thing we can really work hard on is to make sure that when you drop them off at a school or a daycare, that their water is not going to be the problem that they have to deal with. There may be 1,000 other things that we get nervous about, but I think we'd like to take water off that list. So that's the first kind of the rationale for it. And I would argue there's sort of two approaches. You can do widespread testing and then sort of tell folks there's a problem. So the test and tell model, or the make the assumption, especially in, like as Kurt mentioned, the communities like ours, the older communities with older infrastructure, where, and this is not a criticism, this is not a Democrat or Republican problem or this is no one's fault. But when you have aging infrastructure, especially infrastructure you can't see, it's the thing like in your house, right? When you have a problem in your house, if you see it every day, you get stressed and you make sure you fix that. It's the part of the house that you don't see that you sort of, I'll deal with that later, and then it's a problem. It's very similar to with drinking water in your pipes. You assume everything's fine, I'll deal with it later. 50, 60, 70 years have gone by, and it's like I said, it's no one's particular fault. It's not a party's fault, but just investing in those types of, that part of the infrastructure just hasn't happened like it should. We're starting to do more of it now, but filter first would be, we're going to make the assumption that there's a problem and put a filter on it first, provide that clean water, and then you test and see if there's a problem. And if there's a problem, then you remediate the pipes. And if there's not, it never hurts to have a filter on the water, on the faucet, right? So it's one of those, and it's also actually a significantly cheaper way of doing it, which I think is important to note too. At first glance, you may think, well, this is a lot more expensive, but it's actually the opposite. It saves significant resources, both on the front end and in the long and in the end. and it allows you to make, I mean, we're gonna have to make investments in all of our infrastructure over time, but if you can do it through a planned approach and a data-based approach, you know, right now there's not a problem, and you can figure out how you want to replace it. If there is, the filter solves the problem in the short term, and as you make the investment, you're fixing only the pipes that need to be fixed first, and then you can make planned investments over time. So it's really I think it's really a good bill package. I mean, I've worked on a lot of good things. Kurt has. We've worked on other things together, but this one is when you can save money, you can protect folks, and you can help take stress off a parent or grandparent when it comes to their kid. I think that's one of those ones that will get widespread support as the more we talk about it. And thank you for your leadership on helping with it, Charlotte, and your team.
Yeah. And we've got a quick question in the Q&A. Where is the source of lead in water in schools and childcare centers? It's a little bit different, right? Like we have lead service lines, lead pipes all over the state. But it seems like there's other sources of lead in water in some of these school facilities, right? In childcare centers.
For sure. And I don't want to monopolize all the time, but I have a little bit of experience in this, and I'll let Kurt answer too, because, you know, it's different. That's one of the problems, but it can be different in different facilities. So when we were dealing with it in Flint, we'd find there's a couple problems. One, pooling and water not moving is a problem. That's a general problem for all water, right? Whenever older systems have dead ends in the system, and the same thing can happen in schools and daycare centers, especially schools and daycare centers that aren't open on the weekend, right? That period of time from Friday to Monday when the water is not flowing, that can be a problem one. So it can be the whole system can have a problem based on pooling or not of the water needs to move in order to sort of protect itself. Then you find drinking fountains, solders, like sometimes at the place between where the pipes come together is often a problem. So it's you know, if you do it, if you put the filter in, you sort of resolve the problem, and then as you do the testing, you can come to determination of exactly where the source of the problem is in the school or daycare center. And there may be plenty of places where there isn't one right at this time, but like, you know, as a person who lives and has grown up in Flint, I think most of us just take our water for granted. And now we're seeing there's issues in water systems all across the country, both municipal and sometimes on wells. So I think having a little bit more knowledge and being a little bit more thoughtful about your water is just good for everybody in anyway. And then if you put this filter on, you're going to get better water quality either way. And if it's a problem, you're protecting somebody. And there's one of those things where there's really no downsides. I hope I answered at least a portion of that question. I tried to.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the things that I found really interesting when I started this work was that even labeled lead-free plumbing still has lead in it. And I don't think a lot of people appreciate that yes, it's less lead, but it's still lead, and it still poses a threat. So even if we remediate and put in all new lead-free certified plumbing and fixtures, there's still the risk of potential lead exposure.
Yeah, and I just add on to what Jim said, and you know, I deal with a lot of my school districts that are not on a public water system. They have a well, and lead can be naturally in the water table, and you know, we take it for granted. I'm sure everybody's tasted some of the well water that's had some heavy metal taste to it, but a filter just takes any of those impurities out, and again, puts parents at ease, teachers at ease, and we know that we can alleviate some of those things for a future issue with a child. Yeah.
We're getting some other questions in the Q&A about highlighting how important, you know, filtering out lead is, but wondering if, you know, to your point, Senator Nick, earlier, if these filters will help with other potential contaminants. So I wondered if you all could address some of that too. I know PFAS in particular is one that's a concern across the state right now. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. One of the things that we found, and I'm sorry to always refer back to Flint, but this is obviously my experience. So when we first started going through this issue in Flint, what we found, unfortunately, was in the beginning, and this is not just no one thought of it. So the NSF is the sort of the certified, the group that certifies, I think it's National Science Foundation, certifies the quality of the filter and determines what it would, what toxins and lead and other toxins it would, it can filter out. one of the problems we found early on is for a whole building filters. I'm just giving some context of like what we're learning about this issue is no one had ever thought to go through the process because it was never, no one was putting in whole house filters for the purposes of lead. So as we look at like bigger structures and we're determining whether or not it should be a filter at the source or a filter at the source of where the water comes in or the source of where the people get the water, we'll look at, I think we would, we're learning more and more through the NSF process and through the scientific process of determining which toxins can be taken out, and each filter is different. I have to, and Charlotte may know better than me or Kurt. I have some PFAS in a few areas around here because we're an industrial manufacturing community, and the old Buick City site has some. I don't know if that specific chemical compound would be filtered out through the specific filters we're talking about. But there's a lot of work being done on PFAS in a separate area. So I know a number of chemical compounds, toxins are removed through the filtering process. Our primary focus was lead because of the neurological damage that can be done for kids. I mean, PFAS isn't, I'm not trying to minimize it. They're both very dangerous. They just have different effects. So I don't know specifically about the PFAS question. I think it's an important one and one that we could make sure we get an answer for. But definitely, it's not just lead. A number of other toxins are taken out, and it just depends on which filter you purchase and put on. But all of them, you start off with the lead, and then they all have some other components of toxins that they take out. It's just a question of which one you make available.
Yeah, and my understanding is exactly the same, that the filters are not yet certified for PFAS removal, but the type of technology, the granulated activated carbon, has shown to be effective in removing long chain PFAS. So I think there is definite co-benefits that we can get in that issue as well, which is really important. So we talked a little bit about cost. What do you guys think that is potentially the biggest barrier to the policy advancing is cost for purchasing and installing these filtered stations, or do you see other things potentially standing in the way of getting this policy done?
Well, if I can jump in on this, Jim, you and I had a pretty good conversation with this earlier, and of course, through the situation with COVID-19, that has been a huge hit to our budget. Ultimately, it comes down as health and safety, and we're going to have to continue to work through this process. But I believe the initial conversation that Jim and I had in how we felt that we could do some grant funding and how we could spread the dollars over X amount of years to get this done and allow the worst facilities to clean up first and then continue to move down is the best approach. And I do believe it'll take a little work, but I do believe that there's an agreement on both sides that we know that this is an issue that needs to be addressed sooner than later. So I believe we'll get that done, and I'm hoping Jim feels the same as I do. But it's going to take a little bit of work right now with the budget restraints that we're under.
Yeah,
100% agree. Yeah, exactly.
And I've got a slide here, which I'm going to share with folks real quick, on the cost projections, and it just hits on a little bit of what you were saying, Senator Ananek, about this being in actuality over the long run the cheaper approach, but it would cost about $54 million upfront to do all schools in Michigan. So it's not a insignificant amount, but when you think about the benefits that you're getting in the long term, and also the fact that this is more cost effective than alternatives and more protective of health, it seems like a no-brainer. But I did want to just make sure we were sharing this information with folks on the webinar.
Sure. And Charlotte, I know this one of the problems with these things is that the dialogue is fascinating, and you end up with a lot of great questions. So I'm looking at the Q&As as we're doing, as you are, and there's a lot of really good questions. And if we don't get to them, feel free, Charlotte, if you want to collect them. We talk often, obviously, and because you guys are such a big force in the Capitol, and the relationships we've all built with you. So I'd be happy to try to answer some more. I mean, there's a number of ones that I think are really, the question about also, so basically, treating the, let me see here, I have it in front of me.
The corrosion control.
Yeah, corrosion control. Yeah, I can always pronounce it wrong. Orthophosphate to prevent corrosion control. I mean, I think it's one of those things where you'd want to do both. It's when applying corrosion control, it's generally done through the municipality or the township or the county, depending on where you live. Expecting having a school or a child, not suggesting the person who asked this is suggesting that, but having a child care center or a school have the ability to do that. They wouldn't have the necessary licensure to know how to do that. So it's generally done at this sort of the point source where the water is being distributed to the community. So I think you would have a bit of both, right? I mean, I think it's one of those things where we've learned so much about water. The more precautions we take, and there's folks talking about individuals on here, both WIC recipients and everyone. It's probably not the worst idea in the world for all of us to put a filter on our water system, no matter where we live. And if we can provide resources to help people that have, difficulty with that, we should. This is specifically done because we know the folks that are no amount of lead is good, but it has the even more dramatic effects on younger folks because of their cognitive, they're still developing, so their cognitive development. So that's the reason why I think Kurt and I and others in the House, and by such a bipartisan approach, is because we just know that it's a good place to start with childcare and schools. And then as Kurt mentioned, with our budgetary issues, we'll have to deal with the most pressing issues first, but we'll keep working on it until this is one of those things we don't even talk about anymore, hopefully. And many years from now, people won't even, they'll talk back. Remember when we used to have to worry about lead? That's what I want to see happen, and we're still on the road to doing that.
That would be great. I long for those days. So, another great question that we got in the chat is, would Filter First not include a plan for testing and replacement? Don't we need both ultimately? And I know there is some testing in the bill, yes. So I just wanted to make sure you guys got a chance to address that piece.
Yeah, testing in this bill, each facility, of course, would be tested, and it would be tested on several times during the year. So it's not a test and run and be done. It's a test. The filter is put in place, test again, and then it's a regular testing process that, and along with that filter being changed on a regular basis during the year, so that it's not a long span without the filter being replaced. So testing is going to have to be ongoing. Especially in the older structures and some of especially our older school systems that have infrastructure that's buried in the ground, even replacing with the new fountains, we're still going to have to test on a regular basis and make sure those lines are flushed on a regular basis. The potential of lead is still always going to be there.
Yeah. So what do you guys think the prospects are for getting this done this year? I know we are quickly running out of legislative session days. Do you see a path forward in the legislature for moving the bills this year? Or do you think more next session? What's sort of your crystal ball reading on where things will go?
Yeah, who dares to take that one, Jim? All right, I'll jump. But I think everybody knows that we struggled to put a budget together this year, and we're there. I believe the conversation will take place this year, and it's going to be something that we're going to have to look at, trying to make sure that we secure the monies. And I think Jim and I are going to have to be very aggressive in calendar year 2021. I'm not sure right now with everything going on and the fear of where the budget is, but I do believe that we can have good conversation and get it started, and we can have some answers in early calendar 2021.
Yeah, I agree. And if we can, there's always the argument we could try to make of passing it with, and then worry about, funding it later. But I think, as Kurt said, we're going to have some work to do, but it's not that people don't support the concept. It's just the budgetary issues we're going through. And you can never, we can only budget off of what we have and what's coming in. But one thing we could do, and I wouldn't want to do this long-term, but we could even reach out to some of the foundations in the meantime, because this is an issue that a lot of folks care deeply about. Long-term, I want it to be the way we're approaching it, but even just to get it started, there may be some folks, I can't speak for them. I haven't had those conversations specifically about these bills, but obviously I have over the Flint issue, and a lot of folks see the benefit of making this investment. So, there's plenty of ways to get to this goal. We want to get these bills passed, and there was a question in the chat about the bill numbers. So mine is Senate Bill 589, Kurt's is Senate Bill 590, and the House it's HB 5104 and HB 5105. And Kurt and I are just going to be tough on this one, just to make sure we keep pushing it. Yep. But I don't think it's a tough sell when it comes to the concepts or the need. It's just we have to be careful. Nobody wants to have us say we're going to do something and then not have the money for it. That's the worst thing we can do. So absolutely, we'll work hard on it though.
Yeah. Yep. It seems like too, there's also a bit of a COVID tie-in, right? In terms of these, the bottle filling stations being touchless. And so that helps in terms of eliminating shared surfaces. I know, Senator, like you talked a little bit about the risk of lead in water increasing as buildings sit stagnant for long periods of time. And obviously our schools, a lot of our schools are at minimum capacity in a lot of places and are not seeing that turnover of water that they normally would. So the risk of lead right now is even higher. So I think there is kind of, there's the budgetary concern, but I do see a real additional pressure and additional need given the COVID situation and given kind of where we're at in schools right now.
Well, and I think especially with flu season and, a bit of a, and still COVID, I mean, sanitary, washing your hands, making sure you're doing all the right things is important. And I'll tell you, and I thanked every individual and every group that sent bottles of water to Flint, and it was the necessary thing to do at the time. But, having just a bunch of bottles sitting around, there's a bunch of reasons why that's bad, right? I mean, just having that plastic, but also just having bottles sitting around and people are touching them and things like that. So just having a safe drinking source it's extreme. I think we can make the case for it, and I think we can get it started for sure because there is a dual benefit here. But at the same, I just, and when you've been doing this thing as long as Kurt and I have, you don't make promises. I'd rather under promise and over deliver than the other way around.
That's a good way of putting it.
So we've got one more minute here. I have one last question, but I want to make sure that if folks have questions, pop them in the chat in the Q&A. And we'll make sure that we get answers out in follow-up email. So we want to make sure that we get a chance to answer your questions. We just might not be able to do it today. But my last question is, what can people do to help? What would you advise folks do in order to help, get these bills across the finish line?
Well, I would say the best thing that I would suggest is that they reach out to their local representative and senator and urge them to ask for these bills to be looked at and discussed amongst themselves. And then, of course, work with their local officials to make sure they're also reaching out and expressing their concerns, so that we've got Senator Ananek and I can do a lot of talking inside the chambers, but when public opinion starts to move the needle, that moves the needle very quickly, and it can bring things from the back of the line to the front of the line. So that's my suggestion.
I couldn't agree more. And I think one thing, I mean, I'm sure Kurt probably agrees. Sometimes us individually and sometimes our staff are not necessarily going to know. Well, we would, of course, because it's our bills. But like, if you just send an email to a representative or a senator's office and say, "Hey, please vote for Senate Bill 589, 590," they're not going to necessarily know what that is. So say 589, 590, the filter first package, because we have so many bills in front of us, especially in lame duck. I mean, we're going to try to move this at the end of the year if we can find an avenue to get it done. but people are going to be dealing with so many things. That's just a quick sort of lobbying help component, is just to say filter first. I think that's always a positive. Start with your own local reps and senators, and I just think that's a really good approach. And I remember a staffer looking at this. The environmental lobby is always real respectful. Sometimes people do this. You have to do this. I represent. That approach turns a lot of folks off. I think talking about the benefits of it, why it would save money, why it would help communities. There was another question in the post about how it can actually save money and actually bring in resources. I think talking about those things are all really important. And this is important to everybody. Water is important to everybody in the legislature right now. I think they're starting to realize the importance of water. Obviously, Kurt and I are trying to lead on this, and we see the real importance of it. But everyone has a lot of different issues they're dealing with. So if you can, give a little bit of a background of why you think it's important, I think that'd go a long way too. And then it'll help our efforts to, is Kurt's talking about his caucus and I'm talking about in mine. If we got a bunch of folks saying, yeah, I heard about that from in a coffee hour. I heard about that I got 15 emails about this. It makes it a heck of a lot easier to do our job. Great.
Well, thank you again so much for participating today. And thanks to everybody who is able to join the webinar. Here's some contact information if folks want to follow up directly. And then we'll also make sure that we share the recording and share some answers to the remaining Q&A questions that we didn't get a chance to today. So just wanted to say big thanks. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your Friday and the rest of your weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kurt. Hope you have a good weekend. Thanks, Charlotte, and everybody for having us. Thank you.
You way outdressed me again today, buddy.
Hey, I got a funeral. I didn't even know I had these clothes anymore. I got a funeral. I wouldn't be dressed like this, I promise.
That's okay. You have a great day.
Thanks, you guys too.
Bye, guys.
Bye.